Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to pull back the curtain on the highly intelligent mind. And honestly, it is a place that is deeply emotional, incredibly complex, and almost cinematic in its day-to-day experience. Like a watercolor painting where the colors are just constantly shifting. If you've ever felt like your brain runs on an entirely different operating system than everyone else in the room, well, this is absolutely for you. We're going to explore what actually happens when a mind processes the world with this unusual depth and intensity.
First things first, we've got to dismantle a pretty pervasive Hollywood myth. Pop culture kind of trains us to expect genius to look like, supreme confidence, loud arrogance, pure cold logic. You picture the robotic, unfeeling scientist, right? Or the loud mastermind. But psychology research reveals a completely different reality. The true, highly intelligent mind is almost never like that. Actually, it's often incredibly quiet, it's highly doubtful of its own conclusions, and it's defined by a surprisingly deep, really heavy level of feeling.
Section 1. The internal engine, quiet isolation. Let's start by looking at how this mind functions in total isolation, even before it interacts with the outside world. There's a landmark study from the London School of Economics, and the contrast in the data is just wild. So for individuals with an average IQ, frequent social interaction is a huge driver of life satisfaction. They really thrive on that external engagement. But for those with a high IQ, that correlation entirely flips. Frequent socializing actually correlates with lower satisfaction. You might be wondering why. It's because their prefrontal cortex, the brain's hub for complex reasoning, runs so intensely that it literally requires absolute stillness to recharge. For them, solitude isn't loneliness, it is strictly fuel.
And that is because their internal engine is just always running hot. Neuroscientist Rex Jung found that higher intelligence isn't just about localized processing speed, it actually involves much richer, denser connectivity across totally distant regions of the brain. So think of it less like a quiet, straight country road and more like a massive multi-lane superhighway of information. It's not about thinking faster in one straight line, it's about making these constant, rapid-fire connections across a vast network of completely different ideas simultaneously, all the time.
Because of this highly interconnected web, the highly intelligent brain never truly quiets down. It's continuously running these massive background processes. You know the feeling? It's the brain that keeps you wide awake at 2 a.m., meticulously revisiting these subtle little nuances of an old conversation, analyzing every single word, and then running these incredibly detailed mental simulations for future events that, let's be honest, might not even happen. The processing power is immense for sure, but it demands constant activity.
Psychologist Kazimir Dabrowski studied this specific phenomenon pretty extensively. He called this relentless drive to constantly build theories and turn over problems psychomotor overexcitability. Sounds a bit clinical, I know, but it's basically a deeply restless internal energy. Except instead of physical pacing or hyperactivity, it expresses itself entirely in the mind. It's just turning thoughts over and over, examining every possible angle, constantly searching for meaning and structure even in the most mundane, everyday things.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that there is simply no off switch. And hey, if this describes you, I want you to hear this validation right now. This lack of an off switch is not a malfunction. It's not some anxiety disorder or a defect that you need to cure. It is exactly what a beautifully wired, highly complex brain was built to do. It's a feature, not a bug, of your cognitive architecture.
Section 2. The emotional experience, intense feeling.
This brings us to the emotional engine. And we really need to completely reframe the stereotype here because what looks like cold detachment from the outside is actually a cover for profound, intense feeling. Dabrowski defined this as emotional overexcitability. Basically, it's a heightened responsiveness to stimuli that makes an individual acutely sensitive to their environment. See, highly intelligent people don't feel things less. They process and feel things with staggering intensity. They're often absorbing the entire emotional weight of a room before anyone even speaks a single word.
A major study published in the journal Intelligence highlights exactly what triggers this sensitivity. The researchers found that a higher measured IQ strongly correlates with significantly greater emotional reactivity to things like art, music, complex moral questions, and particularly human suffering and systemic injustice. This really explains the heavy emotional burden they carry around. They're walking through life absorbing the weight of the world with almost zero filter. It makes beautiful things completely transcendent, but it also makes tragic things absolutely devastating.
Section 3. The social friction, seeking depth.
Now, let's move the narrative outward a bit. What actually happens when this intensely processing, hypersensitive mind has to interact with everyday society?
Well, we get this phenomenon that psychologist Lita Hollingsworth called stimulus poverty. It is the deeply uncomfortable experience of a mind that simply cannot find sufficient challenge or conceptual depth in its immediate environment. It perfectly explains why things like forced networking events or endless small talk about the weather leave high IQ individuals feeling incredibly drained, completely unstimulated, and honestly even physically restless.
Which brings us to a really powerful realization. What often looks like pure arrogance to the outside world is actually just a quiet longing for a real conversation. When highly intelligent people appear aloof or distant at a dinner party, it's almost never born out of some superiority complex. Instead, it's a deep, completely unmet desire to find someone, anyone, who can jump into a topic and follow them all the way to the very bottom of an idea, without getting bored or needing to turn back to surface-level chatter.
Over time, this results in a very specific and I think somewhat tragic social adaptation. First, they observe a shallow conversational environment. Second, they experience the intense, frustrating drain of that stimulus poverty. And finally, they cope by calibrating their personality way down. Because they know the room can't hold the depth or intensity they require, they just lock it away. They shrink themselves to fit the space. And sadly, this means a massive part of who they truly are never even sees the light of day.
Section 4. Not belonging. Different resolution. All of this eventually culminates in an overarching, subtle sense of displacement. After spending decades studying exceptional minds, the legendary psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi found a pretty universal truth. He noted that highly intelligent people almost universally report their inner lives as being the most complex, the most difficult to explain, and the hardest to share with others. There is an undeniable, quiet isolation that comes with carrying that level of internal complexity and rarely, if ever, finding an external mirror.
But if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer today, I want you to understand this. This quiet sense of not belonging, it is not a deficiency. It's not a personality flaw that you need to fix or medicate away. It is simply the mathematical, predictable result of living and processing the world at a vastly higher resolution than the environment around you. When you inherently notice more details, draw wider connections, and feel things more intensely than the average person, a mild sense of displacement isn't just common, it's completely inevitable.
So, I want to leave you with a question as we wrap up today. Are you living at a different resolution? Just take a second to think about your own psychological landscape. Does your brain demand a depth that ordinary life simply struggles to provide? Have you been masking your own intensity just to fit in? I really hope this explainer has given you the vocabulary and the structure to finally understand these complex